This is our presentation about how we created a math activity that is accessible for English language learners. In our hypothetical situation, we are early in the school year of a third grade class in Utah. In our classroom, we have 5 English language learners, 3 from Korea and 2 from Peru. There are 15 students total in our classroom, and they are learning multiplication. The UEN course standard that we're using in this third grade math is the standard 3087, which is to fluently multiply and divide.
The lesson activity that we're examining in this presentation is this math activity of a multiplication speed drill time test, where the students just try and see how many different questions they can answer within a minute. This activity shows cognitivism, particularly through that of Noam Chomsky and Saussure. For Chomsky, it's the idea of competence and performance that's most apparent in this activity. Competence in language learning refers to language rules and how language works, whereas performance is applying and using that language. So Chomsky theorized that you have to understand and practice to gain competence before you can perform with that language. So in this situation, the students are forced to learn and memorize the products of their numbers before applying them to word problems, with the rationalization that the better they have these numbers memorized, the better they'll be at solving word problems. In addition, this might be hard for our ELLs who are learning this concept by memorizing English words for the numbers and their products without necessarily understanding the concepts and the meanings behind them to connect with those English words. Additionally, the cognitivism is shown through Saussure's idea of the sign versus the signified. And Saussure theorized that learning should focus on one or the other, but not necessarily both at the same time. The sign refers to the language or the words, whereas the signified is the meaning behind them. So by splitting up the language and the meaning, so in this situation with the math activity, by looking at just the numbers in this exercise and the words for the numbers instead of just the concepts, and the meaning behind those numbers as a whole, and the idea of multiplication, the meaning and the language, or the sign and the signified, have been separated into 2 separate pieces. And in that math activity, only the sign, or the language and the words, was really addressed. Overall, this exercise shows cognitivism in that it focuses on learning an input, or a mastery of the language and specific facts, to produce a specific output, to find the right answer, instead of looking towards the meaning and development of math or even of language in a dialectic and unified way.
Some of the changes that we would make to this activity is to just give the children enough time to solve the problems. Adding a time constraint just adds a lot of additional stress that's really just unnecessary. And then instead of having an entire sheet that the children have to solve, we would just select a few different problems at various difficulty levels for them to solve. Seeing multiple rows of math problems can be really intimidating. Instead, we can pick out a handful of problems that we think that the students can solve on their own, and having both easy and hard questions can build the students' confidence in their own skills, and it will also make them more likely to develop a good relationship with math, which is really what we want. Another thing that we would do is make a word bank with the mathematical terms. If we provide a small word bank with simple terms in the students' L1 and L2 that the students can use to help them understand the math a little better, it will help them solve the problems. This doesn't necessarily need to be an exact translation. The students can make a word bank of what the terms are and in their own definitions so that they are using terms that make the assignment easier for them to understand. This will also help the teacher see how the student is making sense of math. Another thing that we could do, or that we would do in this lesson, is have children explain what the math problem would look like in a real-life application. When children connect the problems to real-life situations, they can see that the math that they're doing at school has practical use, even when they're outside of an academic setting, like in their personal lives. Another thing that we would do is offer manipulatives, because manipulatives help children have a physical representation of the units in the math problem as a visual aid. This gives them the freedom to solve a problem in whichever way they want and whichever way makes the most sense to them. So they'll be able to choose to use the units however will work best for them, but they could also just choose to not use them at all if they don't want to. And then the last thing that we would do is to set aside some time for the student to explain their answer in a verbal form to a more knowledgeable other. It's important to give students time to verbally explain their thinking, whether that be to their peers or to the teacher. Having that time set aside gives an opportunity of language use between peers and can help students process the question and the response. This also gives the teacher an opportunity to check for understanding without any performance pressure. The sociocultural theorist that we chose to use in our lesson plan was Vygotsky. He taught that activity and mediation is central to the experiment. Understandings are found through activity with mediational tools. These tools help learners reach the end goal. Some examples of these tools could be language, symbols, diagrams, word banks, experiences, etc. We can support the learning turning into development. In general, learning happens through activity and the use of mediational tools. Like Vygotsky, in our adapted lesson plan for teaching multiplication, we plan to provide mediational tools to help students better understand and apply what they are learning. We will give students the agency to learn the multiplication in a way that they find helps them learn it the best. Instead of using memorization and number problems, students will get more meaning from connecting multiplication to their life and their experiences. This is very helpful for English language learners because when we put the language of math into context, it has more meaning that they will understand and be able to learn from. Also, like Vygotsky, while we are helping students, the students are also teaching us about their ways of applying multiplication. They are the teachers during this lesson. When they have the opportunity to make their own word problems at the end of this activity, the students, especially English language learners, are able to bring their funds of knowledge into the activity and use their experiences and culture. Overall, this adapted lesson plan will help students in better understanding the language of math and applying Vygotskyan ideas of mediationalism.